Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Malice and the Mitten. I'm Tracy Preston.
And I'm Christine Mulligan.
So today's case comes to us from Bay City. And I have to tell you, this is one of those stories that has stayed open for more than 50 years. Not because people forgot, but because the people who love this little girl never could.
Okay, so you're already letting me know this is going to be a heavy story.
It absolutely is, but it is also important because at the center of this case is not just a cold file. It is a 13-year-old girl, and her name was Jan Marie Rohrer.
13 years old, huh?
13. And more than 5 decades later, her family, her friends, and Bay City still do not have the answer they have been waiting for.
All right, and now she would be 63, huh?
Yeah. Look at you with the quick math.
Yeah, look at me. Well, I point that out because, people that were there during that time and it resonates with them because they remember it vividly, they're still around, mostly, all of those people. Probably still in the same town.
Right. Right. Now, before we begin, I want to recognize the listener from Bay City who brought Jan's story to us. You trusted us with a case that still matters deeply to your community, and we do not take that lightly. Today, we are going to handle Jan's story with care, with restraint, and with the respect her family has deserved for more than 50 years.
And before we get too far, we do want to give a content warning. This episode discusses the disappearance and murder of a child, an unsolved homicide, grief, and details involving human remains. We will keep the details as respectful as possible, but please take care of yourself while listening.
And a legal note before we begin. Jan Marie Rohrer's murder remains unsolved. No one has been convicted in connection with her death. Throughout this episode, when we discuss persons of interest, investigative theories, arrests, questioning, rumors, or possible connections, we are going to be very careful with our language. Suspicion is not proof. A theory is not a conviction. An arrest without charges is not guilt. And rumor is not evidence.
That matters, especially in a case this old.
It does, because in a case like this, there are decades of pain, decades of speculation, and decades of people wondering what happened. But our job is to not turn rumor into certainty. Our job is to follow what has been publicly reported, center Jan, and keep coming back to what her family has always wanted: justice for Jan. A 13-year-old girl left home for school on a rainy November morning in Bay City. She had lunch money in her pocket, artwork she was proud of, and a family expecting her home that afternoon. She never made it to class, and more than 50 years later, the question still sits with her family, with Bay City, and now with us. Who killed Jan Marie Rohrer? It was Monday, November 26, 1973, 4 days after Thanksgiving. Bay City was moving through the kind of late November morning that feels gray before the day even has a chance to begin. Rain was falling. The holiday weekend had just passed. Families were returning to routine. Students were heading back to school. Parents were going back to work. Life was supposed to pick up exactly where it had left off. At 1309 Fremont Avenue, Jan Marie Rohrer was getting ready for school. She was 13 years old, an 8th grader at McGregor Intermediate School. Her school was at 1012 Fremont Avenue. That was about 3 blocks from her home. Close enough that walking there should have been ordinary. Close enough that nobody would have looked at that short route and thought it was the beginning of a mystery that would last more than half a century. Jane left home that morning wearing a blue parka, a beige turtleneck sweater, and blue jeans. She had enough money for a hot lunch at school, and at home, she had left behind $7, and that detail matters. Because $7 in 1973 was not nothing, especially for a 13-year-old. If Jan had been planning to run away, if she had been planning to disappear, if she had been planning to leave her life behind, that money would have mattered. But Jan didn't take it. She took her lunch money. The kind of money a child takes when she is expecting a lunch at school and dinner at home.
Yeah, that is a small detail, but it does say a lot when you're thinking about whether the kid was planning on coming home or not.
It does, and for her family, it mattered immediately. Because from the beginning, Jan's mother, Rita Rohrer, did not believe her daughter had run away. Rita knew Jan. She knew the rhythm of her daughter's life. She knew the kind of child Jan was. Jan was not in trouble. She had not argued with her mother. She had not stormed out. She had not emptied a drawer, packed money, or left behind the signs of a child trying to escape. She left for school. That was all. And then she did not come home. Jan's family had already known loss. Her father, William A. Rohrer, had died 2 years earlier, 1971. After his death, Rita was raising Jan in the Fremont Avenue home. Jan's older brothers, Thomas and William, were away from home by 1973. Thomas was 22 and attending graduate school in Virginia. William was 19 and attending the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. So on that Monday morning, it was Rita and Jan at home. A mother, a daughter, a school day, and a walk that should have taken only minutes.
And so this is where it gets confusing, right? Because she was going such a short distance and she disappeared like that?
Exactly. McGregor Intermediate School was close. Jan was not crossing a county. She was not traveling across town. She was walking a familiar route in her own neighborhood. Now, later reporting would add one important detail. A school employee told police she saw Jan outside the school that morning, but all indications were that Jan did not attend classes that day. So we have to say this carefully. Jan left home for school. Someone later reported seeing her outside the school, but she apparently never made it into class. And by that afternoon, when Jan did not return home, ordinary life at 1309 Fremont Avenue stopped. Rita called police. She told them her daughter was missing. Now, according to Thomas Rohrer, police initially treated Jan's disappearance as a possible runaway situation. And to understand that, we have to remember the time period. This was 1973. Missing child investigations did not always begin with the same urgency or structure people expect today. There was no Amber Alert system. There were no viral posts, no cell phone pings, no doorbell cameras, no digital trail, no neighborhood surveillance footage being pulled within hours. And in many missing person cases, especially involving teenagers, the first assumption could be that the child had left voluntarily. But Rita didn't believe that. She believed something had happened to Jan.
That's mother's instinct right there. But I think it's crazy back in the day that that is what everyone assumed. It was almost like they wouldn't believe children.
Right.
I don't know. I'm just getting triggered because back in the 70s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, I feel like children disappeared like rampant and not a lot was done. But like you said, it was the times.
Right. And in this case, that instinct was backed up by the details. Again, Jan leaving the money at home, taking lunch money, expected at school, expected back home, and she was not the kind of child her family believed would vanish by choice. Thomas would later describe Jan as a good kid, an excellent student, well-behaved, and secure in her family life. There was no known argument that morning, no family conflict that explained it, no reason in their minds for Jan to run. But as the hours passed and then the days, the investigation began in that terrible space between possibility and fear. Maybe someone had seen her. Maybe she had gone somewhere. Maybe someone had misunderstood. Maybe she would come home. That is the cruelty of the first hours after a disappearance. Hope does not leave all at once. It stays. Because the alternative is too unbearable. And in Bay City's South End, people began looking. Rita searched, neighbors searched, friends searched. Lists were made of Jan's acquaintances. Michigan State joined the investigation and flew a helicopter over Bay City's South End. The search expanded, but the answers did not. And the search grew, so did the noise around it. Rumors began to circulate. Someone said Jan had run away with a boyfriend. Someone said she had gone to Cleveland. Another person said she might be staying at a family cabin in West Branch. Her family followed leads. They listened, they hoped, they checked what they could, but those leads did not bring Jan home.
That must have been torture for her family, because every rumor probably felt like it could be the one that finally explained it.
Exactly. And that is one of the most painful parts of a case like this. When there are no answers, every possibility feels like a door. And every door that opens onto nothing breaks the family a little more. For Rita, the waiting became its own kind of life. Jan's best friend, Peggy Burke, would later remember Rita sitting by the phone with a police scanner every day, just waiting, listening, hoping for something, anything. And there was still daily life happening around that waiting. Peggy kept visiting the Rohrer home after Jan disappeared. She helped where she could. She even walked Jan's Chihuahua, Mitzi.
Aw, that was nice. And it was probably actually good for her best friend, too, to be around the mom. It was probably good for both of them in a weird way.
Yeah, I can imagine. Because that is the detail that brings the whole thing into focus. There was still a dog to walk. There was still a phone to sit beside. There was still a mother waiting, a best friend trying to help. And somewhere in all of that, a 13-year-old girl was missing. But before we go deeper into the investigation, before we talk about the search, the recovery, theories, the neighboring case that had raised questions, and the decades of waiting that followed, we need to pause here. Because Jan Marie Rohrer was not just a missing girl from 1973. She was not just a name in a cold case article. She was not just the child who did not come home. She was a sister, a daughter, a best friend, a student, an artist, a girl who loved science and math, a girl who had a little dog named Mitzi, a girl who had Thanksgiving with her family just days before she disappeared. And if we are going to tell this story the right way, then we have to begin not with the person who took her life, but with the life that was taken. So before we follow the road to Crow Island, before we look at the investigation that never fully closed, before we talk about suspects, theories, and the question that still hangs over Fremont Avenue, we are going to spend time with Jan, because she deserves more than the way her story ended. She deserves to be remembered for who she was. Jan Marie Rohrer was 13 years old, and 13 is such a specific age. Old enough to have opinions, old enough to have her favorite things, old enough to be forming a sense of who you are and who you might become, but still young enough that school, home, family, friends, and pets make up most of your world. Jan was in 8th grade at McGregor Intermediate School. And from the way her family remembered her, she was not drifting through life, she was engaged with it. Her brother Thomas remembered her as smart. Not just generally smart, but strong in science and math. She was interested in biology, and he believed she may have even imagined becoming a physician one day.
And at 13, that says a lot. She was already thinking about her future.
And what I love about that detail is that Jan was not just one thing. She was not only academic, she was also creative. Thomas said Jan had an artistic side. She liked sculpture, metalworking, jewelry making, two-dimensional art, painting, and mixed media. So when you think about Jan, do not picture only a school photo or a name in an article. Picture a girl with science in one hand and art in the other. A girl curious about how the body worked, maybe dreaming of medicine. A girl making things with her hands. A girl proud of what she created. And that last part matters because Thomas had seen Jan only a few days before she disappeared. It was Thanksgiving. He had come home to Bay City from graduate school in Virginia. He was 22, and Jan was his little sister. By then, their father had been gone for 2 years, and Thomas and William had become more than older brothers in some ways. William would later say that after their father died, he and Thomas became male role models for Jan. And over that Thanksgiving holiday, Thomas remembered laughing with Jan. He remembered talking about her school, and he remembered her showing him artwork she was proud of.
That's a normal brother-sister moment.
It is, and that's why it hurts. Because at the time, nobody knew that would become one of the last memories. Nobody knew that the artwork Jan showed him would one day become part of how her family explained who she was. Nobody knew that 4 days later, that same little sister would leave for school and never come home. Her other brother, William, remembered Jan through the rhythm of ordinary sibling life. Homework help, teasing, the everyday push and pull of a big brother and a little sister. William was 19 when Jan disappeared and attending the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. Both brothers were away from home, trying to build their own adult lives while Jan was still in Bay City with their mother. But Jan was not distant from them in memory. William would later say Jan's memory never faded. He kept a photo of her on a shelf in his study where he saw her every day. And as he moved through milestones in his life, he thought about her. What would Jan have become? What would her life have looked like? What kind of woman would that bright, creative, science-loving girl have grown into?
That is the part that people don't always understand about losing someone young. You don't just lose who they were. You lose every version of who they might have become.
And that is exactly the wound her family carried. Jan was not only taken from their past, she was taken from their future. And then there was Peggy Burke. Peggy was Jan's best friend. They lived 2 houses apart, and Peggy said they spent nearly every day together. Jan stayed at Peggy's house all the time, and Peggy stayed at Jan's. That is the kind of childhood friendship where houses almost blend together. 2 girls going back and forth, after school hours, inside jokes, shared meals, families that know each other because the kids are always in and out. Peggy was about a year apart from Jan in age, and when Jan disappeared, Peggy did not just lose a classmate or a girl from the neighborhood. She lost her best friend.
Yeah, and at that age, your best friend is your whole world.
100%. After Jan disappeared, Peggy kept going to the Rohrer home. She helped Rita where she could, and one of the ways she helped her was by walking Jan's Chihuahua Mitzi. And I keep coming back to that detail, because in the middle of fear, and police calls and searching and questions no one could answer, there was still this little dog who needed care. A dog who did not understand why Jan was not coming home, who still needed to be walked. And Peggy, this young girl grieving her best friend, did that. Peggy also remembered Rita sitting by the phone with a police scanner every day, waiting, listening, hoping. And I want to sit with that image for a second because it tells us so much about what a disappearance does to a home. The home does not become quiet in a peaceful way. It becomes alert. Every sound matters. Every phone call might be the one. Every voice on a scanner might lead somewhere. Every knock at the door might change everything. Rita was not simply waiting. She was suspended. Her daughter was missing, and her life had become listening.
That is heartbreaking. And this poor kid, Peggy, she was just witnessing it all.
Yeah, and she was a child too. And for years, decades, she carried Jan with her. After Jan's death, Rita gave Peggy a pair of musical angel figurines that had belonged to Jan. And decades later, Peggy still kept those angels on her nightstand. Not in a box or tucked away, on her nightstand. Close enough to see every day, close enough to remain part of her life. Those angel figurines are one of the details that feel almost too tender to touch, because they are not evidence, they're not a clue, they do not solve anything, but they tell us something evidence never could. They tell us that Jan was loved in a way that outlived her. They tell us that Peggy never forgot. They tell us that Rita, in the middle of her own grief, gave something of Jan's to the girl who had loved her like a sister. And they tell us that even decades later, Jan still had a place in someone's room, in someone's daily life, in someone's heart.
And that's a beautiful way to remember her.
It is, and it is also a reminder of what this case is really about. Because yes, this is a murder investigation. Yes, this is a cold case. Yes, we are going to talk about police, suspects, theories, evidence, and the long search for answers. But before any of that, this is about a 13-year-old girl who had people. A mother who knew her, brothers who adored her, a best friend who kept her angels, a dog named Mitzi, a future that was beginning to take shape. Thomas once said that his family lost a sister and all the joy of her life. And that line stays with me. All the joy of her life. Because Jan's life was not only the years she had already lived. It was every birthday that never came, every graduation, every piece of art she ever made, every science class she never took, every patient she might have helped if the dream of medicine had become real. It was every holiday where her chair was empty, every milestone where William thought of her. Every year, Thomas kept the records, and every day, Rita waited for an answer she never received.
Never received? Does that mean Rita died without ever knowing?
Yes, she did. Rita Rohrer died in 1991. She never learned who killed her daughter. And Thomas would later say that when Jan disappeared and was found dead, something died inside their mother, too. That is one of the hardest truths in this case. Jan's death did not only end one life, it altered every life around her. So now that we know a little more about Jan, the artist, the student, the sister, the best friend, we have to go back to that Monday afternoon. because the girl who should have come home from school did not. And when Rita called the police, the first question was not yet who killed Jan Marie Rohrer. At first, the question was simpler. Where is she? And why is no one treating this the way her mother feels it should be treated? When a child does not come home from school, time changes. A few minutes late can be explained. A friend stopped her. Teacher kept her after class. She walked slowly. She forgot something. She took a different way. But then a few minutes becomes half an hour. Half an hour becomes an hour. And somewhere in that stretch of waiting, a parent's mind begins to move from irritation to worry to fear. For Rita, that fear came quickly. Jan was supposed to come home, and she did not. And when Rita contacted the school, she learned something that made the day even more terrifying. She had not attended classes.
Yeah, that is terrifying, because Rita thought that she was at school all day, so the worrying didn't begin until after the school day was over, only for her to find out that she was never at school, and this was an all day long that she was already missing.
Right. And that is the moment the whole day shifts. Because from Rita's point of view, Jan left home that morning to walk a short, familiar route to McGregor Intermediate School. It was only about 3 blocks from their home. That walk should have been ordinary. It should have been forgettable. But now Jan had not come home, and the school was saying she had not been in class. Later reporting adds an important detail here, and we need to be precise with it. A school employee later told police she saw Jan outside the school that morning. But all indications were that Jan didn't attend classes that day. So Jan may have made it as far as the school grounds, but she apparently did not make it into the school.
And that is a super narrow window to disappearing.
And that narrowness is part of what makes this case so haunting. Home was close, school was close, the route was familiar, and somewhere inside that small space, somewhere between leaving home, possibly being seen outside school and never attending class, Jan disappeared. Rita called police and reported her missing, but according to Jan's brother Thomas, the initial response was not what the family hoped for. Thomas later said police seemed to consider the possibility that Jan had run away, and again, we have to hold that in its time period. It was 1973. There were no Amber Alerts, there was no digital footprint. There were no cell phone records, no social media, no surveillance video from every business or front porch. And when teenagers went missing, law enforcement sometimes began the assumption that the child may have left voluntarily. But Rita didn't believe that, not for Jan, not for her daughter.
Because Rita knew her.
Yeah, and a mother knows. Rita knew the difference between a child who was angry and a child who was gone. She knew Jan had not been fighting with her. Jan had not packed money. Jan had taken only what she needed for lunch. At home, Jan had left $7 behind, and that was not a small detail to her family. That was a signal. If Jan had intended to leave, why leave the money? If she planned to run, why take only enough for a school lunch? If she was trying to disappear, why begin the day like every other school day?
All of those little details make the idea that she was a runaway completely false.
Thomas would later say Jan was an excellent student, well-behaved, and secured at home. There was no known fight that morning, no sign she was trying to escape her life, no reason for Rita to believe Jan had simply walked away. And that is the first deep frustration in this case, because while police may have been working from the patterns and procedures of the time, Rita was working from something else. She was working from knowing her child. As Jan's disappearance spread through Bay City South End, people started searching. People went door to door. Lists were made of Jan's acquaintances. Michigan State Police became involved, and a helicopter flew over South End. From above, they could scan blocks, rooftops, yards, open spaces, and areas that would take hours to cover by foot. But from the ground, the search was personal. This was not a map. This was Rita's daughter. This was Peggy Burke's best friend. This was Thomas and William's little sister. And every hour that passed made the fear sharper.
And did they find any solid leads early on?
Well, there were leads, but solid is another question. Rumors began almost immediately, and some of them were cruel, in the way rumors often are when people do not know the truth. Someone said Jan had run away with a boyfriend. Someone said she was in Cleveland. Someone said she was at a family cabin in West Branch. And the family had to live inside those possibilities, even if they did not believe them. Because what if one was true? What if someone had seen her? What if she was alive? What if she was waiting somewhere? What if the next call was the call? That is how rumor keeps hurting a family. It does not only spread misinformation, it forces hope to run in circles. William later remembered one false lead in particular. He said, someone called and claimed Jan was running down the street. William ran after that call trying to find her, but it wasn't Jan. And that image is unbearable to me. A brother running because there is a chance, even the smallest chance that his sister is alive and nearby, running toward hope and finding nothing.
That is devastating, because even if it's a false lead, and even if it is seemingly false, you can't ignore it. You gotta, like her brother did, run towards it for the smallest hope that it's gonna lead you to her. That's devastating.
It's absolutely devastating, especially when it is your sister, when it's your daughter, not when the world has become one question. Where is Jan? The family checked what they could. They listened, they searched, they hoped. But days passed and still no Jan. Two older brothers, both away from home, both pulled back emotionally into the house on Fremont Avenue, where their mother was waiting by the phone. Thomas would later keep records of Jan's case, a binder of documents, a box of news reports. But before the binder, before the decades of articles, before the case became a cold file, there was this first unbearable stretch of time. The waiting, checking, rumors, search, the refusal to accept that Jan had simply chosen not to come home.
And of course, Rita didn't believe any of that.
No, Rita believed something had happened. And she was right to be afraid. But at that point, the family did not know whether Jan was alive or dead. They did not know whether she was nearby or far away. They did not know whether someone had taken her, whether someone had hidden her, whether she had been hurt, or whether she was somehow still waiting to be found. That uncertainty is one of the cruelest kinds of grief, because it does not let you mourn, and it does not let you breathe. It only lets you wait. And the waiting changed the Rohrer home. A mother listening to police traffic, hoping her daughter's name might come through, hoping for information, fearing information, needing the phone to ring, dreading what it might say if it did. That is not normal life. That is a home transformed into a vigil. The search did not end in one day. It did not end in 1 week. As time passed, the hope that Jan might walk through the door became harder to hold, but impossible to release. Thomas later said police had told his mother that in many cases, missing teenagers return after a day or two, but Jan did not. And as the first days became weeks, and then the weeks became months, the Rohrer family moved into a terrible new reality. Jan was not just late, she was missing. and nobody could tell them where she was.
And so at what point now does it shift from a missing person case into something worse?
For Rita, I think it shifted almost immediately. For police, that shift came later. And for the family, the question became less and less about whether Jan had chosen to leave and more about whether anyone would find her. In the summer of 1974, police returned to Bay City and helped William investigate the neighborhood themselves. Thomas later described being troubled by what he learned about parts of the South End at the time. He mentioned criminal activity, motorcycle gangs, and drug culture. But we have to be careful here. Those were Thomas's later recollections about the neighborhood environment. They are not proof that any specific group or person was involved in Jan's disappearance. What they do show is how far the family was willing to go. They were asking questions. They were looking where they could. They were trying to find any path that led back to Jan, and then November came again. Nearly a year had passed since Jan left home for school. The seasons had changed. The holidays were coming back around. Thanksgiving was approaching. And Jan's family still had no answer. For almost a year, Rita had lived with the question. Thomas and William had lived with the question. Peggy lived with it, and Bay City had lived with the question as well. Where is Jan? Then on November 7th, 1974, hunters were in the Crow Island game area in Zilwaukee Township, nearly 1 year after Jan left home for school. Crow Island is in Saginaw County, north of Bay City. It is the kind of place where land, marsh, water, and brush can fold over each other. A place where something can be hidden, not because someone builds a wall around it, but because the landscape itself becomes a kind of cover. For almost a year, Jan's family had lived with uncertainty. They lived with false leads and rumors. They lived with hope that became harder to hold but impossible to let go of. And then hunters found human remains.
And life, as they all knew it, completely changed again.
The remains were later identified as Jan Marie Rohrer. The missing person case became a murder investigation. And for Rita, Thomas, William, Peggy, and everyone who had searched and waited, the question changed. It was no longer only where is Jan? Now it was who killed her? Now we're going to be careful here because Jan was a child, and we do not need to linger on the condition of her remains to understand the brutality of what happened. Police reporting states that police said Jan had been shot and bludgeoned. That is all we need to say right now. Jan was 13 years old. She had left home for school, and almost a year later, she was found in a ditch in the Crow Island game area.
That is absolutely devastating. After all that time, the family finally gets an answer, but it is the worst possible answer.
The absolute worst. Because there is a kind of answer that does not bring relief. It ends one form of suffering and begins another. For almost a year, Jan's family had existed in the terrible space of not knowing. And when Jan was found, that uncertainty ended, but what replaced it was grief, anger, and a new question that would not leave them. Who did this, and why? The timing was cruel. Jan disappeared on November 26, 1973. She was found on November 7th, 1974. Thanksgiving was approaching again. The season that held Thomas's last memories with her was coming back around. The holiday where he had laughed with Jan, talked with her about school, and seen artwork she was proud of. That holiday was approaching again. But now Jan would not be missing at the table. She would be gone.
And that makes Thanksgiving memory even more painful for that family. It will never be the same.
Because for families, dates become landmarks. The day she disappeared, the day she was found, the holiday before, the first birthday after, the first Christmas, and then the years began to stack on top of those dates. But the dates themselves never really move. They stay fixed. For the Rohrer family, November would never again be just November. After Jan was found, the investigation had to look backward. Back to the morning she left home, to the short walk between 1309 Fremont Avenue and McGregor Intermediate School. The report that a school employee had seen her outside of the school, to the fact that she apparently never attended class. Back to every rumor, every false lead, every possible sighting, every person who might have known something. Because now there was no longer a possibility that Jan had run away. There was no longer a possibility that she had left Bay City by choice. Jan had been murdered.
And they still don't understand where the crime actually happened, right?
Right. And that is one of the hardest parts. From the reporting we have, the public record does not give a clean, confirmed answer to where Jan was killed, where she was held, or how she ended in Crow Island. We know where she left from. We know where she was supposed to go and where she was found. But those points do not tell us everything that happened in between. And in a homicide investigation, that in-between space matters. It matters for evidence, for witnesses, for timeline, and for opportunity. But in Jan's case, nearly a year had passed before she was found, and time had already done damage. We're talking weather, seasons, memory, evidence. All of it had shifted. Retired Bay City Police Detective Dean Vossler would later talk about the difficulties in Jan's case. He worked on it years after it had gone cold, and one of the things that stands out in the reporting is how much investigators were still trying to understand long after the original search ended. There were questions about the original autopsy, evidence, and whether anything could still be tested. At one point, investigators looked at whether evidence could be submitted for DNA testing or latent print examination. A hair found in a glove recovered with Jan's body did not yield usable DNA for comparison. And that detail is important because it shows us something about cold cases that people do not always understand. A case can be open, a detective can care, a family can push. But if the evidence is limited, damaged, degraded, missing, or never collected in a way that modern testing can use, the road to charges become painfully narrow.
So even if they're still investigating, they may not have the kind of evidence people can expect them to have.
Exactly. And in a case from 1973, you can't go back and create a modern crime scene. You cannot go back and collect what was not collected or preserve what time destroyed. But that does not mean the case is hopeless. But what it does mean, the investigation becomes dependent on what still exists. A witness, a confession, a piece of evidence that can still speak. A person who finally comes forward. For Jan's family, though, the technical limitations of evidence did not soften the loss. They had spent nearly a year hoping she was alive. Now they had to grieve her. And they had to grieve her without justice. Thomas and William had lost their little sister. Rita had lost her daughter. Peggy had lost her best friend. And Bay City had lost a child whose walk to school became one of the city's unanswered questions.
What happened to Rita after Jan was found?
According to her sons, Jan's death changed Rita permanently. Thomas would later say that when Jan disappeared and was found dead, something died within their mother. And that is a haunting sentence. And I think anyone who has seen a parent lose a child understands what he meant. Rita kept living, but something in her life had been broken in a way that never fully healed. Peggy remembered Rita sitting by the phone with a police scanner during the search, and after Jan was found, that waiting did not transform into peace. It transformed into a different kind of waiting. Waiting for an arrest, a confession, for someone to say what they knew, waiting for justice. And for Thomas, the search for his sister did not end with Crow Island. In many ways, that is where his second search began. The first search was for Jan. The second was for truth. Over the years, Thomas kept documents, he kept reports, he kept the paper trail, a binder, a box of news articles, the record of a case that might have gone quiet if her family had not kept saying her name. And that image matters. A brother sitting with papers, decades later, still trying to understand what happened to his little sister, still hoping someone would come forward, still asking for justice.
And still loving his little sister, because that's love.
It is love, and grief, and responsibility, all folded in together. Because when a case goes cold, families often become the keepers of the flame. They remember the details. They correct the record. They answer the anniversaries. They talk to reporters. They ask again. They wait again. They hope again. And every year, they carry the person they lost forward. Police would develop potential suspects. Detectives would revisit evidence. The family would keep pushing. Reporters would return to the story, and decades later, investigators would say they believe someone knew what happened. But before we move into those investigative threads, there is another piece of this case we have to understand. Because Jan's death was not the only unsolved death connected to that stretch of Fremont Avenue. Just next door to the Rohrer home, at 1307 Fremont Avenue, lived another family carrying its own unanswered loss. A woman named Florence Madashevsky. And before Jan disappeared, Florence had also been found dead.
Next door, the next door neighbor?
Next door. And that is where this case becomes even more complicated. Because investigators, family members, and people in the neighborhood would later ask the same question. Were these two deaths connected? Or was Fremont Avenue carrying two separate tragedies side by side? Florence was known as Flossie. She was 46 years old, a mother of 3. And her death, like Jan's, remained unsolved. And I want to be careful from the beginning because Florence was not just a possible connection in Jan's case. She was her own person, a mother, and she had her own unresolved homicide. She deserves to be named with the same respect. Florence went missing on August 26, 1972. That was about 15 months before Jan's disappearance. Now, according to MLive reporting, Florence had been at a bar on Washington with relatives. There was reportedly an argument, and Florence left, walking home, and she never made it. 3 days later, on August 29, 1972, children found her body in a ditch near Lincoln and Russell Roads in Portsmouth Township. Police said Florence had been bludgeoned and appeared to have drowned in the ditch. No one was ever charged in her death.
That is horrifying and awful. And then Jan disappears the next year, right next door. So I'm immediately thinking someone in the neighborhood needs to be checked out.
Right. My mind just keeps saying, did these detectives go to every single home in this neighborhood? That's all I keep thinking about. And that proximity is why people wondered. 2 unsolved deaths, 2 families living side by side, 2 cases involving violence, Florence in 1972, Jan in 1973. For people in the neighborhood, the question was almost impossible not to ask. Were Florence's death and Jan's murder connected? Or was Fremont Avenue holding two separate tragedies that happened close together, but not because of the same person? And this is where our language has to stay careful, because questions are not proof, patterns are not convictions, and suspicion, even from investigators, is not the same thing as evidence strong enough to charge someone.
So, we're talking decades later. So do we now know, were the police even questioning that these two cases were connected? Did they ever state that they were?
At least one retired detective did. Retired Bay City Police Detective Dean Vosler worked on Jan's case years after it had gone cold. According to MLive, Vosler suspected there could be a connection between Jan's murder and Florence's death. He believed the similarities were significant. Florence lived next door to Jan. Florence had been found in a ditch. Jan was later found in a ditch. Both deaths were violent. Both cases remained unsolved. But even with those concerns, there was no public evidence that provided the same person killed both Florence and Jan. And no one was ever charged in either case. Florence's son Dale also became part of the public reporting around Jan's case, and we need to discuss that with absolute fairness. Dale said he was questioned about Jan's disappearance years later. He denied knowing anything about Jan's case. He said he did not know anyone involved. He said he never heard anything about it. And he also said he did not believe his mother's death and Jan's murder were connected.
And was Dale ever charged for anything relating to any of this?
No. Dale was not charged with wrongdoing in Jan's case, and according to reporting, he cooperated with police, strongly denied involvement, and said he had taken and passed polygraph several years earlier. So we are not going to treat questioning as guilt. We are not going to treat proximity as guilt. And we are not going to turn a theory into a verdict. The only fair way to say it is this: a retired detective suspected the cases could be connected. Dale Matuszewski denied involvement, and he was not charged. And the connection remains unproven.
Unproven is an important distinction to make, it sounds.
It is everything. Because Jan's family deserves truth. Florence's family deserves truth. And no family gets truth through careless accusation. What Dale did share publicly was a memory from the day Jan disappeared. He said he remembered coming home and seeing Rita Rohrer on the porch. Rita asked him, "Have you seen Jan today?" That line is so simple, but it lands like a stone because it gives us Rita in the middle of the first fear. Standing outside, asking neighbors, looking for any sign of her daughter. Have you seen Jan today? It is the kind of question a parent asks before the full horror has a name, before the case file, before the anniversary articles, before the word homicide, before decades of waiting. Just a mother on a porch asking the person next door if he had seen her child.
That's a haunting image.
And it also reminds us that this neighborhood was not an abstract backdrop. These were real homes, real porches, real families, real people who knew one another, or at least knew of one another. Dale said he knew Jan's older brothers when they were teens, but he did not really know Jan because she was much younger. And that matters too, because Fremont Avenue was close in geography, but not every person in the neighborhood knows every child in the same way. Still, after Florence's death and then Jan's disappearance, those two homes became linked in public memory. Whether the cases were truly connected or not, they became part of the same question people in Bay City could not stop asking. Jan's best friend, Peggy Burke, spoke carefully about that question. She said people wondered whether Florence's death and Jan's murder were connected, and that she added, "It's all speculation." That is exactly where we have to leave it. Speculation, not fact, not proof, not accusation, speculation.
Speculation still speaks to what people were thinking, though.
Yes, and that is why it matters. because even when speculation cannot solve a case, it can show the fear people were living with. Imagine being in that neighborhood. A woman next door had been found dead in 1972. Then a 13-year-old girl disappeared in 1973. Nearly a year later, Jan was found murdered, and no one was charged. People were not just grieving, they were afraid. They were trying to understand whether there was danger nearby, whether someone among them knew something, whether two families had been struck by the same shadow or by separate acts of violence. But fear cannot answer those questions. Only evidence can. Vossler continued to look at Jan's case years later. He looked at what could still be reviewed. He examined theories. He considered Florence's death, and he pursued what he could. But even he acknowledged the central problem. Without a witness or significant evidence, charging someone would be difficult. That is one of the most painful realities in this case. There were theories, names, tips, suspicions, and patterns some investigators believed mattered. But there was not enough to bring Jan's killer into a courtroom.
And everyone's just sitting around stuck with questions.
Yes, Jan's family, Florence's family, Peggy, the neighborhood, investigators, Bay City. Everyone was stuck between what they feared and what they could prove. And that is a terrible place for a case to live. There is another detail in the reporting that shows just how much grief had settled on that small stretch of Fremont Avenue. Vossler said Florence's mother died in the Fremont home the same day Jan was reported missing. That death was not ruled suspicious, but just think about that street. One family already grieving Florence, one family about to lose Jan, an elderly woman dying the same day a child disappears, homes side by side, each carrying its own version of loss. And it's almost too much.
That is a heavy amount of grief in one small part of the world.
And we have to be very careful not to make coincidence sound like conspiracy. But we also cannot ignore the emotional reality. Fremont Avenue was not just where Jan began her walk to school. It was a place where multiple families were carrying unanswered sorrow. Florence's case remained unsolved. Jane's case remained unsolved. And between those two homes, people kept wondering if the truth was somewhere close. So where does it leave us? It leaves us with two truths that have to sit side by side. A detective can see something worth examining, and evidence can still fail to reach the level required for a charge. That is not satisfying, but it is honest. And in a case like this, honesty matters more than a clean theory.
Because a clean theory could still be wrong.
Exactly. And if we're going to honor Jan, we cannot replace the truth with something that only feels complete. We have to live with the discomfort of what was not known. We have to say where the evidence stops. We have to protect people from being tried by rumor. We have to keep asking for the one thing that could still matter most. Information. Someone who saw something, heard something, was told something. Someone who has carried a detail 4 years and never realized it could matter. Because after Jan was found, the case did not end. It widened. It moved through suspects, tips, theories, and dead ends. And over the years, investigators would return to Jan's file again and again, trying to find the piece that could turn suspicion into proof. But every cold case has a clock. Not just the clock of evidence, the clock of memory, the clock of witnesses, the clock of people aging, moving away, dying, or choosing silence. And in Jan's case, that clock was already running. After Jan was found, the investigation entered a different phase. The search for her missing child had ended, but the search for her killer had only begun. And in some ways, the second search would become even harder. Because by the time Jan was found in November of 1974, nearly a year had passed since she disappeared. That meant investigators were not working with the immediate aftermath of a crime. They were working backward through time, back through memories, through rumors, possible sightings, false leads, back through a school day no one could fully reconstruct. and back through a route that should have taken only minutes.
And while they're going backwards, they were already behind even at the start through no fault of Jan's family. But she was gone from the morning and not from the afternoon. So the clock on that is all wrong from the get-go.
Yeah, we lost a lot of time, 8 hours, right? At least. And that is one of the most difficult things about this case. The first hours and days of any investigation matter, but in Jan's case, the earliest assumption, according to her brother Thomas, was that she may have run away. By the time the case was clearly a homicide, time had already taken a lot. Not everything, but a lot. Over the years, police developed several potential suspects and people of interest, but no one was charged. There were suspects. There were theories. There were people questioned. There were tips. But publicly, no one was charged with Jan's murder, and a case cannot be solved by suspicion alone.
And that is the ultimate frustration, because you can have direction, but not enough to prove any of it. That's difficult.
And that is exactly the problem. A direction is not a conviction. A theory is not evidence. And in a courtroom, the question is not only, do investigators believe this person may have done it? The question is, can the state prove it beyond a reasonable doubt? In Jan's case, investigators kept running into that wall. They had pieces, but pieces are not always enough. One of the tips that surfaced came in 1977, about 3 years after Jan's remains were found. According to reporting, a tipster gave police a detailed account of Jan's killing and blamed 2 local men. That sounds significant, and it may have seemed significant at the time. But years later, retired Bay City Police Detective Dean Vossler revisited that lead. He interviewed one of those men in 1999. That man reportedly said he had claimed responsibility for Jan's murder while he was in prison for unrelated offenses, but only to impress or intimidate others. Vossler also interviewed the second person named by the tipster, and that person reportedly had what appeared to be an alibi. Vossler ultimately believed those 2 men had nothing to do with Jan's death.
So even some of the most detailed tips, they still fell apart.
Yeah, and that is why tips have to be investigated, not simply believed. A person can confess falsely, lie to seem dangerous, repeat something they heard, can name someone out of fear, revenge, confusion, or rumor. And sometimes a tip can sound like the missing piece until investigators actually test it. And that is why cold case work is so difficult. You cannot ignore information, but you also cannot build a case on a story that does not hold. Another name surfaced in the broader reporting around unsolved Bay City homicides: Todd R. Warzeka. Warzeka was discussed in connection with other violent cases from the early 1970s, but retired Detective Vossler said he did not consider Warzeka a suspect in Jan's killing or in Florence's death. That matters because sometimes, when a case remains unsolved for decades, every dangerous person from the same time period gets pulled into the orbit of speculation. People start connecting dots that may not actually connect. And when someone has a violent history, it can become tempting to fit them into every unsolved case. But investigators still have to follow evidence. And according to Vossler, Warzeka was not the direction Jan's case pointed.
So that's another example of being careful not to force a theory.
Exactly. Because a forced theory might feel satisfying, but it can take a case further away from the truth. And in Jan's case, the truth already had enough obstacles. One detail from the reporting stands out. A hair found in gloves recovered with Jan's body did not yield usable DNA for comparison. That is the kind of detail that feels almost cruel. Because when people hear DNA, they often think of certainty. They think modern technology can reach back into the past and solve what earlier investigators could not. And sometimes it can. Sometimes DNA changes everything, but sometimes the evidence is too degraded. Sometimes there just isn't enough. Sometimes the sample does not produce a profile. Sometimes what remains cannot answer the question everyone needs answered.
Technology can help, but it can't perform miracles if the evidence is not usable. There's nothing technology can do, really.
And that is a hard truth for families, because every advancement brings hope. Every new test, every new technique, every new cold case headline makes families wonder if maybe now, finally, their case can be solved. But hope still has to meet evidence. In Jan's case, at least from what has been publicly reported, the available evidence did not become enough to charge anyone. But Bay City Police Lieutenant Joseph LaNava later explained that cold homicide investigations do not simply close because time passes, and that's important. A case can be old and still be open. A case can be cold and still active. A case can sit quietly for years and then move because one witness, one tip, one piece of technology, one person who finally decides to speak. LaNava also talked about the challenges older cases face. Documentation can be limited. Memories fade. People move away. Witnesses die. Stories change. Details become distorted. Information gets lost, and every year that passes can make the path more narrow.
And that makes the family's persistence even more important.
It does, because when a case is old, families often become the memory keepers. Thomas kept the binder. He kept the box of reports. He preserved what he could because the case mattered, not just as a police file, but as the story of his little sister. And he knew what was at stake. If people forgot Jan, then silence won twice. Once when her life was taken, and again when her name faded. But Thomas did not let that happen. In January of 2002, Jan's case was reopened after new evidence reportedly came to light. And for a family waiting since 1973, it must have felt like hope returning. But according to later reporting, that reinvigorated investigation eventually fizzled. A door that opens just enough to make everyone hold their breath. And then it closes again.
That closing door must be crushing. It's like an emotional roller coaster every couple of decades. It's horrible.
It is horrible. Every time a cold case appears to move, the family is forced to prepare for two outcomes at once. Maybe this is it. Maybe this is the answer. Maybe this is the moment everything changes. But also, maybe it is not. Maybe it will fall apart. Maybe there still will not be enough. And that emotional whiplash is its own kind of trauma. By 2012, nearly 39 years after Jan disappeared, police were still saying the case was not forgotten. Michigan State Police Detective Sergeant Andrew Languski said something that feels central to the case. He said investigators were looking for information from the public. He then said, "Somebody knows." And that is one of the most important lines in all of the reporting. Somebody knows. Not everybody. Not the whole city. Not every person who has reported a rumor. But somebody. Somebody saw something. Somebody heard something. Somebody was told something. Somebody knows what happened on or around that rainy November morning.
Did investigators think this was random?
No. And again, we have to frame that carefully. In 2012, Languski said investigators did not believe Jan's killing was random. When asked if they believed it was someone who knew her, he said, "Without a doubt." That does not identify a killer. It does not prove a suspect, but it tells us something about how investigators viewed the case. They did not think Jan was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time with a complete stranger. They believed someone connected to her or familiar enough with her life and movements may have been involved.
I gotta tell you what, that's what kind of weaves in the neighbor being the neighbor issue, the neighbor disappearance and murder. That's what weaves it together for me. That makes the whole neighborhood questions feel real heavy. Somebody in the neighborhood.
That's where my heart's pulling me to. Because if investigators believed it was not random, then every familiar street, every nearby home, every person who knew the route, every person who knew Jan's routine becomes part of the investigative landscape. It means we understand why law enforcement kept asking for information. Because in a case like this, one person's memory might matter. One overheard statement might matter. One detail someone dismissed in 1973 might matter now. LaNava said even hearsay or gossip would be investigated. And that line could easily be misunderstood, so let's be clear. It does not mean people should go online and accuse someone. It does not mean rumor belongs in comment sections. It does not mean private names should be dragged through social media because somebody once heard something from somebody else. What it means is that if someone has information, even information they are not sure about, they should take it to law enforcement. Let investigators document it. Let them compare it. Let them decide whether it matches something in the file that the public does not know. That is how information becomes useful. Not through gossip, through proper channels.
That is an important distinction because the rumor mill can change shit up and distort things dramatically. But if you just bring that piece of information straight to the case files, it might be matched up with something else and makes solid sense.
Right, because careless rumor can harm innocent people. But silence can protect the guilty. And somewhere between those two dangers is the responsibility to speak carefully and to speak to the right people. As the years passed, Jan's case remained open but unresolved. Rita Rohrer died in 1991 without knowing who killed her daughter. Peggy Burke kept Jan's angel figurines close. William kept Jane's photo in his study. Thomas kept the records. And police kept the file. But the answer still did not come. Then, decades after Jan disappeared, there was a moment that seemed like it might change everything. In 2018, Michigan State Police made an arrest connected to the cold case. For a family that had waited more than 40 years, it must have felt like the ground moved. But what happened next was not a resolution. It was another reminder of how complicated Jan's case remained. Then in April of 2018, there was movement. Michigan State Police arrested 62-year-old Michigan man on an open murder charge connected to the cold case. For anyone who had followed Jan's story, that had to feel enormous. After all those years, an arrest? After all those anniversaries, all those articles, all those pleas for someone to come forward, it must have felt like maybe, finally, something was happening.
And was he charged?
No, and that is the most important part. The man was later released pending further investigation. Public reporting states that, as of the reporting available, he had not been arraigned on charges related to Jan's killing. MLive did not name him because he had not been arraigned, and we are going to follow that same standard. We are not naming him because an arrest without charges is not guilt. An investigation is not a conviction. And in an unsolved child murder case, the desire for an answer cannot become permission to accuse someone beyond what the public record supports.
And although I believe that's the right thing to do, that is hella frustrating for people listening.
It is, and it matters because Jan deserves justice. But justice is not the same thing as naming someone simply because we want the case to have an ending. Justice has to be built on evidence strong enough to stand. And according to what has been publicly reported, that 2018 arrest did not result in publicly filed charges. At the time, Michigan State Police Special First Lieutenant David Kaiser described Jan's case as complicated. He said investigators had received new information a few months earlier, though he did not elaborate publicly on what that information was. He also said Michigan State Police was working with the Bay County Prosecutor's Office to review the evidence and see whether the case could move forward. Bay County Prosecutor Nancy Barushko denied comment because the investigation was open. And Bay City Department of Public Safety Lieutenant Caleb Rowell said his agency had not received new information regarding the case. So what we see in 2018 is movement, but not resolution. An arrest, a release, a review, no public charges, and still no final answer for Jan's family.
For the family, that emotional roller coaster, that probability of reopening everything emotionally all over again.
Yeah. Imagine waiting more than 40 years, living with anniversaries. November 26th, November 7th, Thanksgiving. Every year those dates return. Then suddenly, police make an arrest. Your heart has to prepare itself for the possibility that this is the moment. The moment the case turns. The moment someone is charged. The moment the story finally has a courtroom. And then the person is released and the investigation continues. That does not mean the arrest was meaningless. It means the case remained exactly what officials had said it was. Complicated. And complicated is a word that can sound clinical. But for families, complicated means waiting longer. It means more uncertainty. It means trying not to hope too much, because hope has already hurt you. It means answering calls from reporters. It means seeing your sister's name in the news again and knowing that the same question still does not have an answer. Who killed Jan Marie Rohrer?
And by 2018, Rita was already gone.
Yes, Rita Rohrer died in 1991. She did not live to see that arrest. She did not live to hear investigators say the case had movement. She did not live to see any possible review of evidence decades later. And most painfully, she did not live to know who killed her daughter. Thomas would later say that when Jan disappeared and was found dead, something died inside their mother. That is one of those sentences in this case that I cannot shake, because Rita kept living, but the version of Rita who existed before Jan disappeared never fully came back. Peggy Burke saw part of that grief up close. She was Jan's best friend, just a child herself, and she remembered Rita sitting by the phone with the police scanner, day after day. A mother listening for her daughter in static and dispatch calls. And after Jan was found, that waiting became something else. Not waiting for Jan to come home, waiting for the truth to come home, waiting for someone to be held accountable, waiting for someone to say what happened.
That sentence about waiting for the truth to come home, that is exactly what it feels like.
Because when a murder is unsolved, the grief does not have a full story to attach itself to. Families know the person is gone. They know what was taken, but they do not know why. They do not know who. They do not know whether the person who did it lived among them, moved away, died, confessed to someone, stayed silent, or watched the case from a distance as the family suffered. A brother in an office decades later, looking through papers about the little sister he last saw over Thanksgiving, a little sister who laughed with him, a little sister who showed him artwork she was so proud of, a little sister who left for school 4 days later and never came home. That binder is not just a collection of documents. It is an act of love. It is Thomas refusing to let Jan become just a headline.
It's a brother becoming the keeper of his sister's story.
And William carried Jan differently. He kept her photo on a shelf in his study. He saw her every day. He said as he moved through milestones in his life, he missed her and wondered what her life would have been. And when he had daughters of his own, Jan's memory stayed even closer. Because when you raise daughters, you understand in a new way what was stolen from your family. Not just a child, not just a sister, a whole life. William said, somebody has to know. And that line sits at the center of this case. Because this is not just a mystery from 150 years ago where everyone connected to it is gone. This happened in 1973. People were alive then. People lived in that neighborhood. People went to that school. People heard rumors. They saw things. People may have been told things, and someone may have carried a piece of that truth for a very long time.
And I imagine investigators believe this as well?
Yes. And in 2012, Michigan State Police Detective Sergeant Andrew Lunguski said investigators needed information from the public. His words were direct. Somebody knows. He also said investigators did not believe Jan's killing was random. When asked whether they believed it was someone who knew her, he answered without a doubt. Again, that does not tell us who, but it does tell us why public information matters so much. If investigators believe Jan's killing was not random, then someone's old memory may matter. Someone's old conversation may matter. Something overheard in 1973, 74, 77, 1999, 2002, or 2018 may matter. Cold cases do not always break because of a dramatic confession in a police station. Sometimes they break because someone finally tells the small truth they had been carrying. It means if you know something, you take it to law enforcement. You let trained investigators compare it against the file, because the public does not know everything in that file. There may be details investigators have held back. There may be pieces that only matter when they line up with something no one else knows. And that is why the right tip, even decades later, can matter.
Yeah, so it's not about solving anything in the comments on social media anywhere. It's about getting the information to the people who can actually utilize that information.
It protects innocent people from public accusation, and it protects the case from becoming buried under rumor. But after more than 50 years, they carry the weight of a lifetime. They carry Rita, who died without answers, William, who kept Jan's photo, Thomas, who kept the records, Peggy, who kept the angel figurines. They carry a listener from Bay City who still knew Jan's story mattered enough to bring it to us. And they carry a community that may still hold the missing piece.
It feels like this case has never really left Bay City.
Some cases fade from headlines, but they do not fade from the people closest to them. And Jan's case has lingered because it was so ordinary before it was so horrifying. A child walking to school, short route, a rainy morning, a mother waiting, a best friend nearby, brothers away at college and graduate school, a little dog named Mitzi, artwork from Thanksgiving, lunch money in her pocket, $7 left at home. Those details keep pulling us back to the same truth. Jan expected to come home, and someone made sure she did not. The public record does not give us the answer. It gives us a timeline. It gives us Jan's life, the search, Crow Island, Florence next door, theories, suspects, tips, and evidence that did not become enough. It gives us a 2018 arrest that did not result in public charges. It gives us law enforcement saying the case was complicated, and it gives us a family still asking for justice. So now, before we close Jan's story, we need to gather the pieces one final time. Not to pretend we can solve what decades of investigators have not publicly solved, but to understand what remains, what is known, what is not known, and what someone somewhere may still be able to say. So where does Jan Marie Rohrer's case stand now? More than 50 years after she disappeared, the public answer is still painful. Jane's murder remains unsolved. No one has been publicly convicted in connection with her death. No one has been publicly charged and brought into court for what happened to her. And the question that began on November 26, 1973, still has not been answered. Who killed Jan Marie Rohrer?
And after everything that you walked through, everything that you said, that's still so hard to sit with. And all I keep thinking is, where are all the details about how every neighbor in a 5-block radius of that school and her home, where are the searches? Because I feel like it's someone in the neighborhood. I can't shake it. I can't shake it. I understand. It's just another rumored theory, but I don't know. You didn't say any details about how they ransacked all the houses in the neighborhood looking for someone. Because I feel like that's what should have happened. I know that's not what normally happens, but...
Everybody gets ransacked on this street.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's just too much.
I know, and that's where my gut is too. It's like, but I don't have those details. I don't have them. I wish I did. There is a line in this case that we have held from the beginning, and we are going to hold it here at the end. Suspicion is not proof. A theory is not a conviction. An arrest without charges is not guilt. A rumor is not evidence. But silence can still protect someone who has answers. So, if you know something, do the right thing with it.
Yeah, if you know something. Bay City Public Safety has listed Jan's case among its cold cases. Information can be directed to Bay City Public Safety. Public reporting has also listed the Bay City Public Safety Detective Bureau at 989-894-0161. The Bay City Public Safety Cold Case Contact at 989-892-8571. And CrimeStoppers at 1-800-422-5245. Again, if you have information, take it to law enforcement because Jan's family deserves something real.
They do. Jan Marie Rohrer was not a cold case. She became one. But before that, she was a daughter, a sister, a best friend, a student, an artist, a bright girl with a future beginning to form. She was 13 years old, and on November 26, 1973, she left home with lunch money in her pocket. She was expected to come home more than 50 years later. Her family is still waiting for the truth. Somebody knows.
Jan deserves better than silence.
She does. So if you know something, say something. Take it to law enforcement. Help bring the truth home. I'm Tracy Preston.
And I'm Christine Mulligan.
And this is Malice in the Mitten.
Where the story matters.
But the truth matters more.
Thanks for listening. Like and subscribe on everything you can. Whatever you're listening on, give us 5 stars, thumbs up, whatever it is. Do it. Thanks.
Do it and do it now. Have a great week, everyone, and we will see you all back on Wednesday for Round Robin.
Bye.
Bye.